the biggest problem we've had, and I wrote a paper about this called When Disclosure Serves Secrecy. Now, this paper, I wish you would read it and memorize it. Everything I predicted in that a long time ago, it's on our website. And if you sign up for our email service, we occasionally send it out. It's a free newsletter. You can just sign up. It's at seriousdisclosure.com. It's free. It's completely provided to the public. That paper describes the dangers of doing what we've done. And that is disclosure being hijacked by charlatans who masquerade as disclosure folks, who attach to all the body of evidence I put together the fear factor and the silly season and the evil aliens are coming to eat us for lunch. Yeah. All right? And that has happened. And the betrayals I will not go into because it will break your heart. So the truth is, the thing that keeps me up most at night is all this information being folded into which is all solid information, being folded into disinformation that's tailored to scare the public into what General MacArthur said, and that is World War III will be interplanetary. So now let me talk about the deepest USAP. The deepest unacknowledged special access project is the one that is tasked with doing the psychological propaganda, just like Hitler did with his program, for convincing the people that there's a threat that we should fight. This was launched in the 50s and 60s. First they made the subject ridiculous, and then they made it terrifying, like the movie Independence Day. And this was all part of a plan hatched in the 50s to be sure that we could continue to grow the military-industrial complex, but instead of just one country, sort of a unipolar expenditure out of mainly the United States and at that time Soviet Union, it'd be a global junta military effort because there's a threat from outer space. And they have done about 50 years, 60 years of very, very careful preparation. Now, the UFO subculture is replete with the influence of that. Most people don't understand it. And I wasn't surprised when I got a document in the 1990s from the Strategic Studies Institute describing this project, and this is going to be in our next film, if I can find a director that wants to make this film. And it describes creating a worldwide subculture and cult around alien abductions using stagecraft, I'm quoting, and using advanced aerospace devices, i.e. man-made UFOs, anti-gravities, with creatures that could pass as aliens to engage in events to scare people so that the public could be turned to believe that there's one or more civilizations that we should unite against and fight. And Ronald Reagan at the United Nations literally said, wouldn't our job of creating a unified world be easier if we had a common alien threat? This is, you can Google this clip of Reagan saying this. So that agenda and the Star Wars programs that go with it, and 90+% of all UFO subculture books, movies, conferences are infected with that virus. Now, I'm saying unwittingly in many cases, because how would you know? If you haven't been read into a program that is so sensitive, and I've had physicists who worked at the Dulce complex and at the Pine Gap complex in Australia, that where they manufacture these what are called programmed life forms, these things that look like aliens that are 100% man-made, have integrated circuits in their neural complex, but they're biologicals, and they're on board these. But the people running the craft are military or corporate guys. And they'll sick these things on people, and they'll abduct them and put an implant in them. And the implants are made by EG&G. They're on the edge of the Nellis Range. You want to hear more? All right, this is the stuff people really hate me for. Because I was told that if I expose this is where I'd be most at risk. Okay, because now I'm stepping on the toes of the eschatological fantasies of the people who want endless war. Eschatology is the study of how the world's going to end. And at the core of this secret group are folks who want to precipitate an Armageddon-type conflagration that's War of the Worlds. Because they love and they do it because they want people to be united around another common enemy, not just one country or subculture or religion, but the whole planet. Go look at the movie Independence Day. It's a script right out of the CIA. And so the whole point of that is that you have got to prepare people to hate. So, you know, it's not politically correct to hate someone who's African American if you're white, or if a gay person if you're straight, or hate women if you're a male, or a Jewish person. But it's completely okay to hate an entire planetary group of people, whether they're called grays or greens or purples or whatever, because they know that humans have within them this flaw. And it's in the primate monkey mind that is the root of tribalism. And I want to deconstruct this for a moment. We are 98.5% identical to chimpanzees and gorillas. And chimpanzees and gorillas do organize into troops and into warring sects that kill each other. And it is usually based on slight differences of whether territory or appearance. And this can be exploited by demagogues, whether it's religious demagoguery, racial demagoguery, sexism, homophobia. Just pick it. Well, the big one is interspecies. So the next one is, let's get everyone prepared, and we can use these images, just like Hitler used the image of, you know, the blood libels of Germany, you know, portraying Jewish people as grinding up children for matzah meal, and this outrageous stuff that was propaganda. No, this is all true. Go look it up. Unfortunately, most people don't know any history, but you know, if you go look up the history of World War II, there was a foundation built for years for the Third Reich. That's what the Fourth Reich is doing, this secret government. And they've done it very well, extremely well. Now, I met with a man who would not come forward, who was on one of these early abduction squads. Now, don't get me wrong, not everyone who's had contact has had a false abduction happen, but the whole thing's been commingled. I've had contact, but it wasn't an abduction. So what I tell people is that if you mix this together and people don't know that there are two distinct things going on, you think they're all the same phenomenon, when they are not. And this man said in the early days, before they had these programmable things that look like life forms, that look alien, they would use little guys that were short and do a Hollywood mask and suit on one of these anti-grav devices. This is back in the 60s and 50s, 60s, 70s, and abduct people. And so they started this program a long time ago. And it's very easy to do. Very easy if you understand the technology. Now, this is the other problem. Most people don't understand the extraterrestrial technology, and if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand what the reverse engineering spinoffs have been, one of which is what I'm describing. So when they realized that they could stagecraft this, and this is described in the Strategic Studies Institute document. I don't know, the director of the film Sirius didn't want to put that in there. He thought it was too controversial. The next film will have it in there. I'm going to override whoever the director is, that this has got to be in there. But that way you prepare the population for a new enemy to fight. How else can you grow the military-industrial complex from $1 trillion a year enterprise to a $3 trillion or $4 trillion or $6 trillion? You have to have an enemy. As Leon Panetta said, we're spending $110 billion a year to chase 70 Al-Qaeda members in Afghanistan. He said that. So how do you keep that juggernaut going? You've got to have another and a bigger enemy. So in the meanwhile, they'll concoct and create and keep the fire burning. manipulate the world to keep the fire burning, deliberately. And that's what we've seen over the last decade. We go in and break Iraq, and then it creates ice. It just keeps this fire burning. However, the big surprise that's coming, 1,000 times worse than 9/11, is this false flag operation to stage a threat from outer space. There was a man who came to the congressional briefings in 1997, and he was prepared to open this entire box, Pandoras Box of issues, to the members of Congress there. And I will not share his name. I keep a confidence he was going to do it. The night before the congressman came, some intel people came to his room who he had worked with in those projects and begged him not to disclose it. And so he left. He was actually taken that night to a secure facility out in Virginia, and we never saw him again. He left a note under Sherry Adamak's door explaining what happened. But he had told me privately, would not go on camera, that he in 1974 had been on an interagency intelligence committee that had all this already planned out, and they could hit a button and they could release events that would look like ET craft that are man-made anti-gravities, do things that would look like an alien assault on Earth that would stampede the entire world like 9/11 did into fear, where they would then be able to say our next big challenge is to stave off the alien invasion. And I said, how ready was he? He says, we could have hit a button and the whole thing would have run, and that was in '74. Now, that's only because he was on that committee in 1974. He told me, but he said it was fully operational well before then. So we're getting into some really deep and dark stuff here. Some people are very disturbed when I share this. I don't think we have to, it's childhood's end today. You have to go into this with eyes wide open. And so one of my real concerns in putting together all the evidence and information I have on this is that then there are other people who are within the UFO subculture who will take the disclosure moniker and fold it into mutilations and abductions and evil aliens and this and that and the other thing. And I warned about this 10 or 15 years ago. And so it has come to pass. And I am very disturbed by it. It's the one thing that makes me want to shut down all my efforts. Because I don't want to hurt human consciousness more than it's already been injured. My whole purpose is to help us get to a point where we become a peaceful planet that becomes interplanetary and interstellar. Not World War III that's interplanetary. But people who are not very nuanced in their thinking, or as Dr. Richard Haynes at NASA used to say, unselective filters, non-selective filters. They just let anything through and are not discerning, will take information and documents and witnesses and people I have and then fold it in to this other disinformation, and they do not have the discernment because they have not been at meetings with people from Behind Gap and Lockheed and the Cube. The Cube is the big underground facility that Lockheed Martin Skunk Works runs up in the high desert near Edwards Air Force Base. It's the state of the art where all these things are done. And at Dulce, which does exist. There's a man on my team who worked at Los Alamos National Labs as an engineer, senior guy, who knew a man who got on an underground connector going from Los Alamos to Dulce to work on these projects. Now, if you go to Dulce, there's nothing there because it's accessible only underground. It's accessible from Los Alamos, it's accessible from Nellis, and it's accessible from Edwards, all the way from Edwards, Air Force Base in the high desert of California. But these underground connectors, this is no myth. They do exist, and they're maglev, anti-grav, sort of, but they're underground. And you go in one place, and boom, surface in another. Now, this brings up the question is, it's like the old song from the 70s, Don't Be Fooled Again, or The Who, we won't be fooled again. Will we? And I think that's the problem. Knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Vedic and tradition in the Bhagavad Gita. So knowledge is key. We have to share this information. But we have to do it in a way that presents the full story. And that's what I wanted to do today, is to provide the background of disclosure, but also how fraught it is for being hijacked by people who lack the wisdom, frankly, and the insight to know that they're being played by the intelligence community like a fiddle, and putting out information that can only pollute human consciousness to convince people, yes, the UFOs are real and the ETs are out there, but some of them we need to be afraid of and fight in the next big world war. Now, one person asked me once, how can you prove that all of them aren't hostile? I said, well, you can't prove a negative. It's axiomatic. But I was asked this at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Let me tell you a little story that very instructive. So we're there, and there's a colonel there who was in charge of this operation at Wright-Patterson, and Bruce Ashcroft, who was an intelligence officer, although he was posing as a public information officer. He's really Air Force Intel, a suit. And so my military advisor and I, and another man who'd worked for the State Department and who was also a naval intel guy, was with me. And so I went from the Rockefeller Ranch to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, to this place where all this stuff from Roswell was originally sent. And we had this meeting because it was forced on them by the head of J2, the previous one I briefed, my people briefed, Tom Wilson, Admiral Wilson. And when we got in there, we basically said, we're not here to get information from you because we know what you have here. We've already penetrated what's here. We're here to provide information to you so that you do not interfere with what we're doing with the CE5 contact initiative. So civilians are not caught in the crossfire between you guys and what you're doing with ETs. That was the purpose of the meeting, remember. It's very high stakes. The one thing I don't want to do is have a group of people caught in the crossfire. So not that the ETs would hit them, but our folks might accidentally, and we almost were hit at Mount Shasta a few years ago. Yeah, I'll tell you this story if you want to hear about it during the question and answer. But during this meeting, the colonel finally, at one point, said, well, how do you know that these intelligences from elsewhere aren't a threat to us? I said, well, sir, given the galactically stupid things we have been doing, chasing them, firing at them, developing laser, particle beam, and other weapon systems, and knocking enough of them down that you've been able to reverse engineer them. If they were hostile, and they have interstellar transportation technologies, it would have been point, set, match, over in 1945, about the time we developed the atomic weapon. The fact that you and I are having this conversation and breathing the free air of Earth is abundant testimony to the fact that they are non-hostile, even if they may not be pleased with our stupidity. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that these civilizations are altogether in thrall with what's going on this planet. Who would be? Take a look around. But if they were overtly hostile, it could be over in a nanosecond. Because let me explain to you what the technologies are. Okay, all of you have looked at video games and Star Wars movies and Star Trek and other rubbish. So, okay, wipe your mind clean of all the rubbish that Hollywood puts out. Now let's get into some real science for just a minute. If you're going from one star system to another, I mentioned this earlier, you have the ability to create an electromagnetic field and go post-quantum, what Einstein called the spooky effect, where it's the same particle appears in two places at once, like that. And it has to do with non-locality in physics, the non-local cosmos, and other dimensions. But the power associated with that under a controlled circumstance is almost infinite. And if you were to take that knowledge and weaponize it, you could take a planet, target it, turn it into a pink mist floating through space instantly. It would not be a bunch of little laser guns going like this, like you're playing, so if these civilizations have gotten here, by definition, they're interstellar. And if they're interstellar, they're transdimensional. And if they're transdimensional, they have technologies that would make our hydrogen bombs look like a Tinker toy. All right? And yet here we sit, notwithstanding the fact that we have been using electromagnetic weapon systems to target them and knock them down since 1947. The Roswell crash was a targeted electromagnetic switch that knocked 2 craft down. They actually collided with each other. One went down near Roswell, one continued and impacted near Socorro. This is in an FBI document where it talks about a new radar system, that's a euphemism, that was turned on, and these 2 ET craft hit each other, went down. I know men who have operated the state-of-the-art ones that began to be developed in the 50s and 60s. And now we're 60, 70 years into what are called scalar or longitudinal electromagnetic systems, which are sort of electromagnetic pulses that instead of having a wave like this, are point radiation. So they're multiples of the speed of light. And this scalar technology has been worked on for the better part of 100 years in some circles, but certainly intensely for 70. So we have used those systems to track and target ET craft since the 40s. So if they were in fact so hostile, we would have known about it massively. Now, it isn't to say that they may have interests that run counter to the dominant paradigm on Earth. But what's the dominant paradigm on Earth? War. The dominant industry of the world, the number 1 largest, is war making. And still is in 2015, when we should have had world peace 100 years ago with the League of Nations. So this is a big question. And so they may be viewing us a bit jaundicedly and cautiously. And as one British intelligence officer told me, when we detonated the first atomic bomb, a big red flag went over this planet, and it was like kicking a hornet's nest. They became very concerned that we were reaching very advanced technologies and science that was instantly being weaponized and being used against one another. And that meant that we became an existential threat to ourselves, and in time, we, humans, could be an existential threat to other worlds. So that's part of the concern, and it's justified concern, because humans don't have a great track record. Now, this is only because the good people of the world, I mean, most people on the planet are not wanting to blow the planet up. I lived in the Middle East for 3 years. Most people, Arab, Israeli, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, they just wanted to educate their kids. I mean, if you get 10% of sociopaths who want to create trouble, your society's a wreck. And that's what we're dealing with. The good people have allowed the 10% or 5% of sociopaths and psychopaths to run amok, which is what happened with Hitler in Germany. So the good people have to find their courage. And that's our job, your job, my job. So I view this as something all of us have to do. It isn't, don't look to the President of the United States.